Today we will move into a new subject in Buddhist ethics, environmental ethics. In fact, this theme, environmental ethics, is something newly developed in the field of ethics, newly developed in the sense for last 50, 60 years after 1960s and 70s. Also, environmental ethics is something that has come into focus because of modern issues like industrialization, urbanization, population, this type of problems. So the concern about environment is something that has philosophers have been thinking about from different aspects for last couple of decades. Now, when we look at this subject from Buddhist point of view, initially you may think, what did the Buddha say about environment? Because environmental ethics is a response to some new problems, as I said. During the time of the Buddha, I don't think there was a problem of overpopulation, or there was a problem of urbanization. Such problems were really the problems that gradually started emerging for last 100 years or so. But before that, people didn't have a population problem. Particularly today, with the development of modern technology and also medical science, other facilities, people are living longer. And also young children, the number of young children dying is also gradually becoming low. Now, in the ancient times, there were, it is not a good thing, but of course there were always certain factors in nature as a result of which, for example, the population kind of maintained. So, if you take any family, at the very young age, it is quite natural that one or two children is dead. And also there were certain contagious diseases and there was no remedy for them, and then people die. So there were many things like that in the ancient world where people were, the population was maintained, because overall there was not much of population in the world anyway. Even among that limited number, there were many factors that restricted population growth. But today, in developed countries, what they call child mortality rate is very low, because the healthcare is becoming very good. So unlike those days, now children are born in hospitals. Those days, of course, children were born at home. In a way, it is true, because childbirth is a normal thing. You don't need to go to hospital. But of course, today it is believed that a childbirth has to happen under the care of a qualified person, doctor and a nurse and a midwife. So, anyhow, today it is a sign of the development that ordinary childbirth is not happening at home. So usually it is happening under a doctor's care. Now, when it happens under the doctor's care, possibilities of accident when childbirth is happening to the mother or the child becoming less and less and less. So in developed countries, where medical profession is, the practice is, facilities are very good, you can see that child mortality rate is very low. So like that, some of these problems are really, the new problems. Population problem as a result is a new thing. So you might think, how can there be anything in Buddhism? Because during the time of the Buddha, these problems are not there. How can there be anything in Buddhism or taught by the Buddha about these problems? Now, interesting thing is, whatever the problem you look at today, the modern problems, when you analyze a problem, you can see that although it is an ancient problem or modern problem, ultimately the problems arise because of the basic fundamental characteristics of human beings, fundamental characteristics of the society. Like if you look at the fundamental characteristics, those things have not changed over time. Like if we take our own situation, according to Buddhism, people do wrong things because of raga, dosa, moha. And raga, dosa, moha have been in people all the time. Only thing is, from different situation from time to time, from period to period, what we do because of raga, dosa, moha can be different. But actually the root causes, in Abhidharma they are called akusala moola. These akusala moolas remain the same. Okay? So in that sense we can say that any problem, whether they are new problems, whether they are old problems, the problems in society arise because of people's fundamental psychological characteristics. Now if that is true, we can say that Buddha's teaching is applicable, although some of these problems were not there during the time of the Buddha. I hope you get the point I am trying to articulate. For example, if you take raga, attachment, we like to get things, we like to acquire things, we like to accumulate things, But then today what we accumulate is very different from the things people accumulated during the time of the Buddha. For example, during the time of the Buddha, a wealthy person maybe desired to own a good horse-driven cart, right? But today nobody is desiring to have a horse-driven cart, right? But then today we are desiring to have a motor vehicle, brand new. So what is the difference? During the time of the Buddha, people wanted to own a nice horse-driven cart. Today we want to own a nice brand new motorbike or vehicle. You can see only the object of desire changed, but the desire did not change. Right? Object of the desire, what we like to acquire because of our desire, change from time to time. Who knows, even another 100, 200 years, what we are looking at the very comfortable vehicles will be very old-fashioned. People will be laughing at them. Maybe after 100 years, things will be very different. But then, still what remains without changing is people's basic characteristics. In other words, raga, dosa, moha remain unchanged. Only the objects of those things change. Now the point is, if that is true, then we can say that whether the problems are old, whether the problems are new, what the Buddha said can be applicable because the problems arise even ancient days or even today due to the same types of psychological conditions of people. Now ultimately all the problems arise because of human nature, human psychology. Of course, there are other social, economic and all these factors are there. But aided by those things, ultimate responsibility goes to the human mind. So according to Buddhism, if you fix your mind, if you correct your mind, for the most part, things can be corrected. But still there can be other factors to be corrected, like economic, social factors is true. But then fundamentally, basically, the factor is your mind, okay? So because the psychological factors are the most important and fundamental things, whatever that is caused by psychological conditions of people can be answered by Buddhism. Now when you take environmental ethics, actually we are talking about something called environmental crisis. Now this what we call environmental crisis is something new. So today we are discussing world over what is called environmental crisis. There is a crisis in the world. What do we mean by environmental crisis? In fact, if you look at the environment, if you look at the world, you can see that there are disasters because of the resulting from overconsumption of resources. And then problems arising because of overuse of the natural resources. And the population is very high in the world, so the consumption rate is also very high. But unfortunately, the population is increasing in developing countries where consumption rate is not that much. But if you take the developed countries, in the developed countries, although the population is less, they consume a lot. So, these imbalances are there. As a result, ultimately what has happened is things are changing. Natural order is changing. Now, for example, the climate is changing, and we are talking about what is called global warming. So as a result of that, ice, the huge ice mountains in Antarctica and other places are melting. So there are lots of changes happening. Now people are clearing forests. Now why people clear forests? In developing countries, people slash and burn and cultivate. Of course, that is people do because of poverty, right? But then in many other places, people clear the forests in order to take the timber. Now, if you take this country, it's a very good example. All kinds of what is called logging. You cut these huge trees in order to sell them for timber. But then what happens is, gradually the forest disappear. When the forest disappear, the water base of the earth gradually decreases. And then rain doesn't come on time. When rain doesn't come on time, then there is no agriculture. So, all these, repercussions are there. So, collectively, all these things we call environmental crisis. Okay? So, the environment has been damaged. It is changing. So, something needs to be done. So, environmental ethics is really how ethics, as ethics is a branch of philosophy. So, we can say how philosophers are looking at this problem. Actually, environmental crisis and environmental ethics, not only for philosophers, it is for economics, it is for social workers, it is for sociologists, it is for politicians, it is for all people, right? So this issue is, really something that affects everybody in society, okay? So therefore, because there is an environmental crisis, now who has created this crisis? Due to which reasons this crisis has arisen? Now when you look at answers to these questions, environmental crisis has been created by us, human beings. So ultimately we are responsible for that. Now when you say environment, of course it includes human beings too, but basically we are talking about animals. We are talking about plants and trees and plants and creepers. We are also talking about rivers, waterfalls and things like that. And also it includes oceans, continents, countries, islands, everything. So when we say environment, actually it includes all these things. But the concept more than environment, when we want to refer to all these things, we use the word nature, okay? We use the word nature. So nature includes all these things. However, when we look at the aspects of nature, when we look at the aspects of nature as a part of human existence, we call it environment. In other words, when you use the word nature, we are using it in a very broad sense. Okay? Nature includes everything in the universe, we can say. Nature includes everything in this world. However, when we use the word environment, we are using it in relation to human existence. Now the important thing is, we as human beings, how have we treated nature? How have we treated trees and plants? How have we treated animals? How have we treated the natural, the environment, like surroundings, like the forests, rivers? Now, all these things the issues are interconnected. So, now when we talk about environmental crisis, actually we are talking about something that is happening in the world and that has happened in the world, which has aggravated for last 60, 70 years, okay? So today we will be discussing these aspects and see what ethics say about it, and also to see what Buddhism can say about these issues, okay? So as I wanted to explain to you, although these questions were not in this manner during the time of the Buddha, because these questions, problems and the crisis arise ultimately due to the human action and the human behavior, we can say that Buddhism is applicable, or through Buddhism, we can look for certain, answers for these questions, okay? So this is basically what we are going to do today, is to look at this issue and try to understand it. The Buddhist attitude to nature and environment constitute an important aspect of the teaching of the Buddha. These ideas, however, have not been presented as a separate branch of his philosophy by the Buddha. They constitute one aspect of the Buddha's overall worldview. Now, when we say environmental ethics, it doesn't mean that Buddha has said something called environmental ethics. Actually, it is a new concept. But when we read carefully Sutta and the Vinaya, we can see there are things Buddha has said. There are things Buddha has done. There are things Buddha has encouraged relevant to this issue, okay? So, the Buddhist attitude to nature and environment constitute an important aspect of teaching of the Buddha. How should we look at the nature, trees and plants, river, water, and all these things. Actually, we know that there was really a great sense of respect for nature, understanding of nature during the time of the Buddha. They were conscious about, now for example, we know in the Jaina tradition, they had this belief that trees and plants have some form of life. So they treated trees and plants in some ethical manner. So they thought that to break and cut trees and plants and also walk on those things is not really ethical. Now, this is a very interesting idea, because ultimately today we can see later some ethicists really develop something very similar to this Jaina idea. Now, Buddhism does not see it exactly in the same way, but still we know that by establishing this tradition of Vassa, rainy season observance, Buddha accepted and Buddha respected that Jaina tradition, although Buddhism doesn't think about it exactly the same way. We will discuss this matter later. So you can see in the teaching of the Buddha, in fact, environment and how are we going to treat environment is an important factor. Now, concerns about the environment or environmental ethics constitute a very important aspect of contemporary Western philosophy. This aspect started becoming important in Western philosophy since 1960s, when issues such as population growth, industrialization, economic expansion, and urbanization started surfacing, and philosophers felt that they need to respond to such issues. So these things people started talking about around 1960s. Now, this was the time where the results of industrialization and urbanization, people started feeling these things. Now you see cities are being built. What happens is actually in a very limited area, lots of people from other areas of the country come and concentrate in very small area. Now you have high-rising buildings, so many families live in those things. So in those days, you know that the population was spread in a vast area. Now today what happens is more and more people concentrate on only one limited area, which are called cities and towns. Now in a town you can see that so many people are really within a limited space. Now as a result of that, within that town, there has to be a lot of organization, like the distribution of food and also the space for people to walk around. Now when you have high-rising apartment building, so many families living in one building. But then those days, those families would have lived in spread in a very large area. Today they are concentrated on a very small area. Now as a result of this new development, this is what we call urbanization. And then when people come from villages to urban areas, they face difficulties. There are challenges. It is very interesting. Sometimes when you don't see this when you just walk around. I remember, like, if you go by air over a country like, say, for example, United States, it's very interesting. You can see in this huge land, every now and then you see like cities, built up with so many high-rising buildings, like a cluster. And then you see empty land. Then again someplace you see these buildings. Again empty land. And then again you see, the cluster of buildings. So you can see this very interesting. When you see from up, you can see that it's like this, all the people get together and, they are like, trying to share, a very small space. But entire other space is completely free. So in other words, people are concentrating more and more to the cities and the towns. So as a result, you don't have too many people in the village areas. Now, this is happening in all over the world. So this is what we call urbanization. Why people come into cities? Because there are industries are concentrated in cities. So people come to work and then they are going to live there. So the whole lifestyle has been changed. Now these things are happening for last maybe 100 years or so. But in when we talk about Western philosophy, they started talking about in the West starting around 1960s, which means we are talking about last 50 to 60 years, people have been discussing these issues. So 1960s, when issues such as population growth, industrialization, economic expansion, urbanization, similar problems started surfacing. Then I refer to a couple of books. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, published in 1962, which warned people about the bad effects of the widespread use of chemical pesticides on public health. Now, that is one book in 1962, Silent Spring. This book highlighted how bad it is for the people's health, use of some of the pesticides. Pesticides are used in agriculture in order to kill, the insects and, the worms and unhealthy germs. But then by using this very strong pesticide, your food that you eat becomes contaminated. Now, when your food becomes contaminated food, by eating such food, then you become the subject to many diseases, and particularly diseases like cancer and many other things. So this book, now that is in 1962, and then Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb, which was published in 1968, which elaborated on the possible devastating effects of uncontrolled population growth, such as as a result of uncontrolled population growth, and then it results in dwindling animal and biodiversity, the loss of forest, degradation of ecosystems, and climate change are considered to be early works that triggered widespread discussion on environment. So these are only two books I refer to, but there are many books of this nature highlighting what happens with the modernization, urbanization and industrialization. Okay? So when these things happen, and particularly the population bomb, like P68, highlighted a possible devastating effect of uncontrolled population growth. Now, we have to remember this. This is one way of looking at population growth. Actually, it doesn't mean that all the countries, all the societies in the world look at population growth as a bad thing. Now, for example, if you look at countries like India, China, they have a very large population, but the population itself is some societies don't think to be a bad thing. But on the other hand, we know that even those countries, they control their population. They control their population because what happens today is the resources of the earth are limited. Now, if the resources of the earth are limited, and then you have to have some kind of control in the population. So it is generally accepted that population should not allow to grow without any kind of restraint. Now, this is one problem. It's only just one problem. But so these are the issues that triggered this kind of discussion in ethics. So, dwindling animal and biodiversity, because when more and more people are there, and then you have to clear the forest and build the houses, and then the forest have their animals, and then these animals have to be moved further into the forest. Sometimes there is a clash between animals and human beings is happening all over the world. So dwindling, reducing animal and biodiversity, loss of forest, degradation of ecosystems, because when you clear land for cultivation, then the water resources going to be drained and dried, and as a result of no rain, as a result of that no water. So all these issues arise. So these are some of the early works that paid attention to these possible problems, and subsequently of course there are many similar works. Environmental ethics discusses the human being's ethical relationship with the natural environment. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, environmental ethics is the discipline in philosophy that studies the moral relationship of human beings to and also the value and moral status of environment and it is non-human context. Read that carefully. Environmental ethics means human beings' ethical relationship with natural environment. Now basically when we talk about environmental ethics, as I said, we talk about environment means we talk about trees and plants, rivers and waterfalls, mountains, oceans, all these objects, and animals and birds and reptiles. Now these constitute what we call environment. Environmental ethics means the human being's ethical relationship with natural environment. What is the human being's ethical relationship with natural environment? It means how are we going to be related to the natural objects? How are we going to treat natural objects? What is going to be our behavior towards natural objects? Okay. Now, interestingly, usually we think that we are ethically responsible for other human beings, not to the trees and plants, and not to to animals and reptiles or birds. We think that our relation and our responsibility is much far. But the question is, how should we relate to them? What is our relationship? Now, for example, we have so many dogs. These dogs are not really, we are not raising these dogs here. But in around the monasteries, you see a good number of dogs and puppies. Now, of course, they are there and they eat whatever it is available and they live there. But then if we really look at carefully, they are also some type of sentient beings. How should we behave towards them? It's a ethical problem, So sometimes we don't think about it, but we don't do anything wrong to them either. But on the other hand, environmental ethics trying to tell us you can't just take them for granted. You have to really think about them as some beings who are related to you, to whom you are ethically responsible. In other words, you have to be concerned about them, concerned about their well-being. So importantly, not only these sentient animals, but even trees and plants. So, this is something we usually don't think, but when we talk about environmental ethics, it's the human being's ethical relationship with the natural environment. So, it is a basic question is, do we have an ethical relationship? Are we responsible for these things? For example, there are trees. Now, in our whatever the premises, we think that if we want, we can just cut these trees without any feeling, any moral or ethical questioning in our mind. We just cut it. But environmental ethics ask, can we do it like that? How can we do it like that? Is it not a problem the way we do it? So, this type of questions, now usually we don't consider these things. We always think about other human beings. So, in an ethical discussion, you can see that basically we think that our ethical responsibility is the human beings. But apart from human beings, we have animals. Now, when we say animals, animals could include birds, reptiles, and all other living beings. Okay, we have animals, and then we have trees and plants, and then we have rivers, mountains, forests, waterfalls, and so on. And then we have larger objects like oceans, islands, lands, countries, and so on. Now, you can see basically we think that our ethical concern has to be only with regard to human beings. But environmental ethics says no, we have to look at all these things as deserving our ethical considerations. In other words, environmental ethics seem to be saying that we are not only responsible for human beings, we are also responsible for animals. Our ethical consideration has to be extended to animals. And then we are also responsible for trees and plants. And we are responsible for rivers, waterfalls, and other things. And mountains, forest, and these things. Now, it is interesting because if you take Buddhist philosophy, on the one hand, we have been looking at the nature about the world as comprising all these things. We are as part of this nature. But on the other hand, that understanding has not been articulated very clearly. But today, when we look at the modern environmental ethics, in that we are directly these questions have been thrown to us. We can't really escape. So, we have to really consider what kind of ethical attitude should we have on these things. Okay? Now, we never, usually it is true to say that in the society we never think about these things. However, if you read the modern environmental ethical literature, you can see that it has really so much discussion on these things. For example, today, now cutting a tree, of course, at the certain time in certain societies, we never think about that very much. But today, as a result of these things, we are really thinking about whether it is right thing or no, not right thing or not to cut a tree. But I am not saying that all these concerns are because of environmental ethics, but sometimes in the different cultures they have different ways of doing things. For example, when you cut a particular tree, sometimes you have in Buddhist countries, in some Asian countries, people believe that some trees are possessed by divine beings. So you don't cut those trees. Even if you want to cut those trees, you try to get the permission from the tree, some kind of, you do some offering and some kind of religious thing and try to get the permission of the tree. But it's in a way weird thing to say you get the permission of the tree to cut the tree, but you don't cut it arbitrarily, okay? So you are really careful. So you can see that environmental ethics won't promote that our ethical considerations has to be extended to the animals and then trees and plants, rivers, mountains and these things, and also ultimately even much larger things like oceans, islands, lands and countries, and finally to the entire world. Now for example, if the world becomes inhabitable because of our actions, one day world will be not a good place for human beings to live. Then what? Then if that happened because of the way we behave, ultimately we will have to change our behavior, okay? So the environmental ethics is really the human being's ethical relationship with the natural environment. According to Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, environmental ethics is the discipline in philosophy that studies the moral relationship of human beings to and also the value and moral status of the environment. And it is non-human content. Actually, non-human content, that word refers to these things. So here we have human beings, and all these things we can call non-human contents in our environment. If you take our society here, we are human beings here, but of course in addition to human beings, there are dogs, there are cats, there are birds, and then there are trees and plants and the stones and all these things. Now all these things are considered to be non-human content in the environment. So what human beings should do, how human beings should behave towards, how human beings should develop attitude toward these things is really the subject matter of environmental ethics, okay? Two issues studied in environmental ethics. One is, why should human beings be concerned about environment? It's a basic question to be discussed. And associated with it is the question, how should human beings treat or behave towards environment, or what should they do to environment? Now these are two important questions when we talk about environmental ethics. Why should human beings be concerned about environment? And then the second is, how should human beings treat, or what should they do to the environment? These two are important questions. Why should human beings be concerned about environment? That question has to be answered properly, because somebody can ask, okay, why should we worry about trees and plants? What is the reason? Why should we worry about dogs and cats? They are just there. What is our responsibility for them? So that has to be explained. So the one question, what important issue is, why should human beings be concerned about environment? Number two is, having answered that, what should we do, or how should we behave? Now there are two questions here, why question. Explanation is needed. That is a why question. That means you have to explain, why do I have to worry about, why do I have to care about the trees and plants? What is the answer? Now in human society, why do I have to care about my mother? Because she is my mother. Why do you have to care about my brother? Because he is my brother. Why do you have to care about your teacher? He's your teacher. But why do you have to care about a tree? Answer is not that clear, right? Why do you have to care about all these dogs? Answer is not very clear. Now, we need to provide the answer. So, environmental ethics try to provide an answer to that why question, okay? So, in this discussion, we will see what are these answers provided by environmental ethics, what are the answers provided by Buddhism for this question. And the next question is, how should human beings treat or behave towards environment? Now, depending on the answer to the first question, then we ask, how should we behave? Tree is there. How should I behave towards it? Plants are there. How should we behave towards it? For example, do I think that I can do anything I like to them? Or is there any other way for me to behave? So the human beings have to really determine how they should treat or what they should do. So look at these two questions. Basically, our discussion on this topic is going to be answering these two questions. Number one, why question? Why do we have to care about the environment? And then, how should we treat environment, or what should we do? In Western religious and philosophical thinking, there is a belief that human beings have moral obligation only for human beings, and that moral standing should be extended only to human beings. This view has its origin in the Judeo-Christian tradition, which holds that God created nature for the use of human beings. Now, in Western religious and philosophical tradition, of course, I mentioned here Western philosophical tradition because it is connection to the Christianity, and clearly we can show that. But of course, that doesn't mean only Western. Even Eastern traditions can have the same view. So, in the Western religious tradition, philosophical thinking, there is a belief that human beings have moral obligation only for human beings. So, this view and the moral standing should be extended only to human beings. This view has its origin in the Judeo-Christian tradition, which holds that God created nature for the use of human beings. Now, actually, many people think that we don't need to be worried about these things. We don't need to be morally bound to these things. There are no moral obligations for these things. We need to be concerned about only other human beings. I mean, this is basically one ethical view. Of course, there can be some people who think that we don't need to be even worry about other human beings, okay? There are some people who only worry about themselves. But of course, this group of people who think that we have a moral obligation towards human being is much better. But even that, whether it is sufficient, should we be concerned only about human beings, or should we be concerned in addition to these things, okay? This is the question. Now, why some people think that our moral obligation is only for human beings? Now, we think that for last 2,000-3,000 years, particularly in the Western society, we have this view that we should be concerned only with human beings. So, one way to explain this will be in the Judeo-Christian tradition. It holds that God created nature, God created the world for the use of human being. Now, traditional Western ethical perspectives are anthropocentric or human-centered. Now, look at that word, anthropocentric. Anthropocentric. Anthropo basically refers to human beings. Anthropocentric means human-centered. So, the Western ethical perspectives are anthropocentric. Human-centered means ethical theories up to very recent time were only concerned about human beings. How should we behave towards human beings, not about any other thing. Now, if you look at the Bible, we have been talking about in our other world religion discussions on Bible. Here the Genesis. Genesis is the, the beginning chapter in Old Testament. These words, how God created. God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he, him. So that means God created the man in his own image. Male and female created he then. God created man and woman. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over fish of the sea and over fowl of the air and over everything, every living thing that moveth upon the earth. Now this is what Genesis, the Bible says. Now this says God created man and woman, okay, now which means that God created human being. And what did he say? He said, be fruitful and multiply. Multiply means 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, and have children, and it grow like that. And replenish the earth, fill the earth. And look at the next 2 things. Subdue it and have dominion over fish over sea and over fowl of the air. Subdue it and have dominion. What is the subdue? What is the meaning of subdue and have dominion? Now God says to Adam and Eve, which he created first, subdue. You get the world under your control. And dominion. Dominion means your power over the earth. So what God says is, you become the most powerful person in this. You control this. You have the dominion. You have the ownership. So you have the ownership of the fish that swim and the fowl that, so that means every moving thing on earth, even animals, fish and birds, God says, it is for you to dominate. Now, this is a very interesting idea. The idea is that God created the world and make human being the owner of everything. In other words, you can do anything to fish, you can do anything to animals, and you can do anything to trees and plants. So, this idea is called anthropocentrism, okay? Anthropocentrism. That means human being is the center. Everything else is for the use of human beings. So, this idea gives a license, permission for us to use anything for our purpose. Okay? Now, this can be really a huge problematic thing, because when we say to human beings, you can do anything with nature, all the trees and plants and animals, these things have been created by God for our use. So you can do anything. You are the master. Now, what we consider to be environmental crisis actually arise in basically because of that. Because we as human beings, according to Buddhist analysis, we are full of lobha, dosa, moha. Our lobha means we desire so much. Now, desire so much means there is no limit of our desire. Now, when you don't have a limit of your desire, you try to acquire as much as possible. No limit. However much you get, you are not satisfied. You remember in the Pratapala Sutta, Buddha says, Uno loco atitto tanha daso. Uno loco. The world is always una. Una means you don't feel satisfied. However much you get, you feel you need more. That means uno. Psychologically you are not satisfied. All the time, even if you have the best, you think that you should need something more. Uno loco, atitto, you are not satisfied, and tanha daso, you are a slave to the tanha. Now this is the human nature. Now given this human nature, when we have the God saying to Adam and Eve, subdue it and have domination over fish of the sea and over fowl and over everything that moveth, moveth means the little old English, that move upon the earth. Now in other words, you can do anything to birds, anything to animals, everything is for your use. So this particular philosophy, this particular idea is considered to be this is understood as providing justification for the human beings' drive to unlimited exploitation of nature. Unlimited exploitation of nature. There is no limit, unlimited exploitation of nature. So the idea is that you try to get the best and you try to get the maximum and then you try to use them. But the issue is this. We have a moral responsibility. Now we think that if you are living in a household or anywhere, suppose there is a limited amount of food. You just don't eat everything because you want to share it with others. If others are there to eat, you don't eat everything, right? Even though you can eat everything, we don't do that because we always think about others. Now, good people think about other human beings. In a family, everybody shares the meal and one person doesn't eat everything. So the way amount you have, you share with the entire family. Now, that is our responsibility for human beings. But then what happens is sometimes we in today's generation, maybe we are trying to get the maximum from harvest and maximum from everything. But what about the generations that come after us? If we eat and finish everything, what will be for them? So we have to be thinking about it. But then we are thinking about other human beings. But what about the other animals? What about the dogs? What about the cats? Now, for example, in many countries, particularly, for example, when you cut the forest and build cities and, develop farmlands, what about the animals that are living in the forest? Now, very often, particularly elephants, like, animals like elephants, there is always a problem between the farmers and the elephants that you find in many countries, including my own country, Sri Lanka. Very often, elephants come into the village and they kill people and crush houses, damage houses, eat the crops. Why? Because these places have been built by destroying where the elephants habited. So elephant has no place to go now. They are coming to the village and they are destroying the village because the village has been built in their forest. Now, what should we do? On the one hand, we can say, forget about elephants. We human beings have to live. But if elephants can talk, okay, if elephants can talk, then they will say a different story, right? Now we think that, okay, we should live. We can't care about the elephants. But what is the proper thing? Now, should we not allow elephant also to live? What about all the dogs? I mean, very often it's a nuisance, right? It's a problem. But what should we do about it? Can we really collect them and all kill them? Is that the answer? You see, the human beings, I mean, in this whole scenario, if you take animals, trees and plants and rivers, mountains, oceans and everything, human being, we are the people who can think, okay? We are the people who can articulate what we think. Now, although there are animals, birds, beasts and reptiles, they can't talk. They can't talk our language in order to understand, for us to understand. So, they are helpless in that sense. We are the people who can think. We are the people who are intelligent. Now, should we not think about these things when we make decisions? Should we think only about us? What is the limit? Now, if there are more and more people in the society, of course you will have to build houses. maybe clear jungles, but how much could we clear? What is the limit? Now, how should we set the limit? Now, it depends on our attitude towards animals. If we think that we can subdue and we can dominion over them, we can do anything, then of course we will not care about them. So, now you could see that actually this anthropocentric or human centered view, or this view is called anthropocentrism. Anthropocentrism. So that means human centeredness. Everything rotates around the human being. So this is the view. Now this anthropocentrism or anthropocentric worldview is seriously being questioned today. Okay, it is being questioned today. Is that the right attitude towards nature? Now, if we think that everything has to be for human beings' use, how should we do that? So, on the one hand, we have obligation towards the future generations of people. Okay. Now, we are eating and we are having these things. We can say that the people before us left these things for us. But if we destroy, then future people will not have a world to live, proper place to live. So if the resources are limited, then limited resources we have to use carefully. Okay? So on the one hand, we have obligation to the human beings. But here, today actually in this discussion, we are looking more towards the other things. What about the obligation to the animals? What about the obligation to the various types of non-human beings? And then, what about the obligation to the nature, trees and plants? Do we have obligation? Now, that is a question we can discuss. Now, the important thing is you will see that these questions have been discussed by environmental ethicists, the philosophers who have discussed ethics in a very deep manner. So, I am going to give you some idea about it. So, we start from this. So, this is basically the source of Western behavior towards the nature. I mean the nature as something you can own, you can subdue, you can have your dominion over. So, this anthropocentric view is considered to be actually harmful. In the anthropocentric view, only human beings have any intrinsic value. A value of it is own without relation to anything else. All the other things have only instrumental value, value as a means to an end which is outside of it. Now, you know these two concepts, I want you to understand carefully. They say that this anthropocentric view holds that only human beings have intrinsic value. All the others have only instrumental value. Now, what is this intrinsic value and instrumental value? The concept of intrinsic value means the certain thing has a value or worth on its own, not as an instrument. Now, for example, if you take this particular object pen, now this particular thing is we are using to write. So, this is an instrument. Now, why this is important for us? Because we are using this as an instrument. Now, if we cannot use this as in any manner, then the idea is that this does not have any value, any worth. Okay? Now, we can use this as a pen. Also, we may be able to use it as for some other things. But always the value is given to this because we human beings are using it. We have some use for it. Okay? Now, there is no big debate about it because so many things we are using because we attribute a value to it because to the extent we are using this. To the extent a particular thing is useful to us, right? Now you can say tables and chairs, buildings and everything have a value because they are useful to us. This building is very valuable because we can live there, we can do our things here. But if we cannot do anything in this building, then this building doesn't have a value. So that is called instrumental value. Now the same thing you can ask about the tree and plant. Why trees and plants are important? You can say they are important because they serve us by providing shade, for example. So tree is important because it provides shade. A tree is important because it provides balance of nature, like it serves retain the water. So like that, for any particular object, if we say this object is useful for something, we are talking about instrumental value. But the important thing is whether these things have without being instrument, whether anything has intrinsic value. Now for example, human life. Human life is considered to be in this conceptual framework something valuable in itself. Now I can be a teacher, I can be important to you so long as I teach. But if I take my life has worth or value not because I am a teacher, but simply because I am a human being. So as human beings, our life has a value. So that means intrinsic value. But then the question is whether there is such intrinsic value in a tree. Of course, tree is valuable to us insofar as it is helpful to us. But apart from that, any usefulness, can we say that a certain particular thing has value in its own? Okay. The idea is this environmental ethics. Ethicists want to say that not only human beings, all the other things also have intrinsic value. Now we all without much question accept that human beings have intrinsic value. I mean, in order to understand the same thing, you can use the means and end. Now certain things we can say important for us as means, and then there are certain things as ends. Now end means the final goal, means something we do in order to get that. Now for example, we can say we study and get a degree. Why do we get a degree? In order to get a job. Why do we get a job? In order to get money. Why do we get money? In order to live happily. Why do we live happily? Well, we live happily. Now, there we stop, because living happily is the end, final thing. You can't ask why do you live happily? Because we do everything these things in order to be happy, right? So then we can say that getting a degree is means, getting a job is means, earning money is means. But all these things ultimately end in living a happy life. So you can say end, but all the others are means. Now if we are using these two concepts, we can say means something that have instrumental value. Getting a degree, we can say, is only an instrumental value. Getting a job is also instrumental value. Earning money is also instrumental value, because money is useless if we can't spend it, right? Money is useless. So money ultimately we say in order to be happy. So the happiness is considered to be an end. So happiness, in other words, we can say happiness has a intrinsic value. Okay? Happiness has a value of its own, and the other things have instrumental value, other things are instrumental. So if you take human life is life considered to have intrinsic value. But of course, our life can have instrumental value in different situations. I am valuable here because I am teaching. The moment I stop teaching, I am not a valuable person. I mean instrumental thing. But then that is temporary. But if you set aside all these things, still human being is valuable as a person, some kind of value. What that value, of course, you can articulate it separately. But basically, I want you to understand these two concepts. So in the anthropocentric view, only human beings have any intrinsic value, a value of its own without relation to anything else. All the other things have only instrumental value, value as a means to an end, which is outside. Now, for example, we ask the question, why should we include natural things in our ethical consideration? That's the question. Why? Why should we include trees and plants in our ethical consideration? You can say, because trees are useful to us. Then what happens is, if the trees are not useful to us, human beings, then we don't care about it. We care about it only because it is useful to us. But what about the trees are useful to the birds? Trees are useful to the bees. Trees are useful to the worms. What about them? So, but we always look at from our point of view, okay, we should protect trees because trees are important for us. Environment also we can say, why should we care about environment? Because it is useful to us. But then the problem is, we are looking at nature in a very human-centered thing. If something is useful to you as a human being, then it is okay. But otherwise it is not okay. You can do anything with that. Now, you know, this anthropocentric view ultimately goes to the society too. That's why so long as you are young and strong, you are okay. But when you go old, no use. So that means you don't have a value. Okay? I mean, that is wrong. Because whether you are young or whether you are old, you have a value as a person. Okay? But simply society will consider you to be valuable only till you are useful. The moment you cease to be useful, you are not, you don't have any value. So, you know, this anthropocentric view is looking at the nature, environment from a very narrow point of view, which means that you are judging the usefulness or otherwise simply based on, you know, how it how it relates to you on your own welfare. In anthropocentric view, all the other things in nature have instrumental value insofar as they promote the human interest. So all the other things, like what I listed here, according to anthropocentric view, all these things become valuable because they are valuable to the human being. If they are not valuable to the human being, if they are not useful to the human being, these things are not nothing. You know, this is the basic view. And then this is the view that environmental ethicists, environmental ethics try to reject actually. Environmental ethics basically emerge as a challenge to the traditional anthropocentrism. Although not all environmental ethicists do not reject anthropocentrism totally. Now, you know, this is a very interesting philosophical debate here. There are still, you know, there can be now, what I showed is one part. But on the other hand, there are philosophers who argue that, okay, if there are no human beings, why are we talking about this? Ultimately, ethics is something that created by human beings. Even this concept of intrinsic value and instrumental value is created by us, human beings. Entire discussion is done by human beings. So, you know, on the other hand, there are two sides of it. We will see later those people who say that entire nature, environment has its own intrinsic value. then we also, human beings have intrinsic value. What should we do in a situation where human life is threatened? For example, if you take dengue mosquito. Now dengue mosquito is a living being, right? But then it causes dengue and it can kill you. Then what are we going to do with that? Are we going to respect dengue mosquito and grow them or get rid of them? Okay. Now we can say that, okay, killing dengue mosquito is not the answer, but you must not provide opportunities for dengue mosquitoes to be born, to grow. Because when the dirt is there, when the environment is not clean, dengue mosquitoes can be breeding places. But then the issue is this: there is important issue. Now, if human existence is threatened by some animal, what are we going to do? Now, suppose there are dogs, we don't care. But if there is a mad dog, then what? What is our compassion or the kindness towards mad dog? Okay, usually society will kill them. But as Buddhists we can say that, okay, mad dog is going to die anyway within 2 weeks, so you can just confine the mad dog into one place. You don't need to kill them. But anyhow, we are not really having the same compassion we have to the ordinary dogs to the mad dog. You can't. Mad dog either has to be killed or either has to be kept aside, right? You can't have the compassion or same compassion you have to the other dogs, to the mad dog also. So there are issues, but this is a problem that in ethics we can discuss further, because on the one hand, anthropocentrism says that everything has to rotate around human being. But okay, that seems to be not very good. But on the other hand, what is the status of human being? To what extent we can go with nature? This is a long time problem, okay? Now, some ethicists want to argue that in addition to human beings, all the other non-human content, they use the word non-human content, has intrinsic value. Now, when you give an intrinsic value to all these things, what it means is actually then you cannot treat these things as means to some end. You have to treat them as end in themselves, including the dengue mosquito. Now, dengue mosquito, we want to get rid of dengue mosquitoes because dengue is dangerous. But then if you say that dengue mosquito has its own value, intrinsic value, then we can't decide to kill dengue mosquito, okay? Because dengue mosquito has its own value. So, this debate is, something very interesting. That's why I say here, environmental ethics basically emerge as a challenge to the traditional anthropocentrism. Although not all environmental ethicists do not reject anthropocentrism totally. Okay, we can look at this debate subsequently. Environmental ethics includes sentient animals. Now, sentient animals means these animals, and then individual living organisms. Now, individual living organism means basically what is meant is trees and plants, and holistic entities as things with which human beings have moral. Holistic entities are more in this category. So, we have sentient living beings and also what is the term, individual living organisms, sentient beings, individual living organisms, and also much holistic entities. Holistic entities are much larger entities. Now, these three are three different aspects of environment. So, environmental ethics includes these three, particularly sentient animals, individual living organisms, and holistic entities as things which human beings have moral relationship. That means we have to have a moral relationship. In other words, about trees and plants, we have to treat as if we have moral relation means something that involves right and wrong. There is a right behavior towards trees and plants, wrong behavior towards trees and plants, right behavior towards animals, right behavior towards rivers, mountains, and these things. So this is what basically environmental ethics include: sentient animals, individual living organisms, and holistic entities as things which human beings have moral relationship. If ethics is anthropocentric, then animals will not be included in ethical considerations. But many people feel that it is possible to show kindness or do wrong to animals. Now, we will start from here. Now, actually, if ethics is anthropocentric, only ethics is for human beings, then we can't include animals in that. But on the other hand, we know that we can do good things to animals. We can be kind to animals, and we can be cruel to animals, right? Now, which shows that actually animals are living, sentient beings. So, we are morally responsible for animals. But here the important thing is this. Now, we do something good to the animal, we do something good to the dog, but how if dog bite us? Now, can the dog be morally responsible for doing something wrong? It's very difficult to decide, because we don't attribute moral responsibility to the dog, but on the other hand, we really have moral responsibility towards the dog, because we say that dog is an animal, it can't decide what is good and bad. So dog will be doing anything, but we are human beings, we can decide what is good and bad, so we should not behave in a certain manner to the dog. Now, I remember in Sri Lanka about 1 year ago, this very well-known Buddhist monk in the big monastery in around Colombo, there are a couple of elephants in the monastery. So in the morning, this monk, very well-known monk, he went to give some fruits to this elephant. Every day in the morning, he goes and gives fruits to this animal. That day, this animal got the monk and trashed on the floor and trampled it, and he died. Now, do we say that any animal did something wrong? I mean, the monk was very kind, that's why he went to give fruit. He does that every day. But this particular day, he killed the monk. Okay. The interesting thing is this. Now, what should we do to the animal? Should we punish it? I mean, if we punish that animal, then we believe that animal can make moral judgments. But animal cannot make moral judgments. But the interesting thing is, we can make moral judgments about the animal. So we can't do anything wrong because we know the situation of the animal. It is animal. But on the other hand, animals feel. Right? Animals can become happy, animals can become angry, and animals can become very happy when they are given something, when they like to eat. All these things are there. And then animals can feel pain. So all these respects, you have to consider animal to be somebody or animal that to be treated morally. Because you know that animals don't like pain. So you can't give pain to animals, right? So, I mean, that way you can say you have to treat animal in the ethical manner. But of course, you can't expect animal to behave in ethical manner. So when we look at these things, you can see that for animals. Now, in contemporary ethics, Peter Singer, known for advocating animal ethics, according to him, criterion is sentience, or the capacity that animals have to feel pleasure and pain. Now, this name Peter Singer, he was Australian philosopher, now I think he is teaching in American University. He is very well known all over the world, Peter Singer. Now, he is a person who talks about including animals as an ethical category. So, in the modern philosophy, he has written several very powerful books. And he says the criterion why animals have to be considered like that, because they are sentients. Sentience means they have some kind of capacity to feel, happy or unhappy, capacity to feel pain. So, you know, if something has this capacity, so he argues that animals have to be included in this category. So this is basically now, of course, you know, we don't have really time to go into the details of Peter Singer's argument, but you can really go into it. Animal ethicists say that all sentient beings should be given equal consideration, although all may not be treated equally. Now, you know, this is something very interesting. So, animal ethicists say that all sentient beings should be given equal consideration. Equal consideration doesn't mean equal treatment, but they say that all sentient beings should be given equal consideration, means we should consider them in the equal manner, but how we should do with regard to them is a different thing. Maybe we have different degrees of doing things, but because every animal is a sentient beings, every animal should be given equal consideration. Equal consideration means, doesn't mean that every animal should be considered or treated equally. Now, you know, when we use in this word sentient beings, I think this word is doesn't have to come from Western ethics to Buddhism, right? Because we are using this word all the time, particularly in the Mahayana literature, in the English translations of Mahayana literature, you have this concept, all sentient beings, right? When we say all sentient beings in the Buddhist tradition, actually we mean all beings. Now in Pali, we have Sabbe Satta Bhavantu Sukhitatta. Now Sabbe Satta Bhavantu Sukhitatta. Satta means, it doesn't mean Sabbe Manussa Bhavantu Sukhitatta, no. If you say Sabbe Manussa Bhavantu Sukhitatta, then we are only talking about human beings. But when we say Sabbe Satta, actually we are talking about all sentient beings. Now this is you find in the translations of Mahayana literature, you have that. But actually the sentient beings, the Sabbe Satta Bhavantu Sukhitatta also has to be translated as all beings. May all beings be happy. When we say all beings, actually we are not only talking about human beings, we are also talking about all other beings. So in Buddhist ethics, all sentient beings are treated alike in certain respects. For example, because all living beings, plural, love their life, like happiness and dislike unhappiness, all should be treated equally as living beings. So in Buddhist philosophy, we have treated in different ways. Now, in one sense, all living beings are same according to Buddhism. Same in the sense, all living beings love to protect their life. Even the dengue mosquito likes to protect its life. So in that sense, all living beings are the same. However, but according to Buddhist monastic Vinaya, killing an animal is a lesser offense than killing a human being. Now there Buddhism makes a distinction. For a Upasampada monk, killing a human being is a parajika, but killing an animal is a pachitya, right? Okay. This is because karmically an animal is the result of lesser karma than that associated with the human being. Human being in contrast has much capacity for inner development, where an animal may have nothing. So in Buddhism you can see, in one sense we take all living beings as one. In certain respects we share certain things with all living beings. In that sense, the dog, cat and the human being all love their life. So we don't have a right to kill cats or dogs in that sense. However, when it comes to practical level, killing a cat and killing a human being are two different things. Because killing a human being means, again, to become a human being is very difficult thing. being a human being is a result of a great good karma. So if you kill a human being, it is much more serious than killing a cat. Okay? So you can see there some kind of difference. So the different ways of treating. So you can see that actually in the modern ethical thinking, people like Peter Singer have been emphasizing this animal ethics, animal concept. But in the Buddhist tradition, actually we have been treating animals very much like, at certain level and certain other level. So that is why I say, when you look at the modern ethical discussions, there is so much Buddhism can contribute, okay? So much Buddhism can contribute, and there is so much we can get from Buddhism when we analyze this kind of problems. Okay, maybe I will wind up today's discussion with this. I will try to conclude the discussion maybe next week when we get together. But basically what I tried to say today is, this concept of environmental ethics. So environmental ethics basically triggered from what we call environmental crisis. There is a real issue, there is a real problem in the world. In response to this, how should we behave towards environment is the important aspect. First, why should we do something, and then how should we behave? So by environment means human beings, animals, trees, plants, and all these things. But human beings we are the human beings, we are doing it. So how should we behave towards these things is an important question. All right, I will stop the discussion at this point, and do you have any questions or any comments or anything? Yes. Okay, some animals react to certain colors, some animals don't react to certain colors. Animals are different. Actually the animal's behavior, as we know, is different. Now some animals can be according to their nature, they may be seeing some danger in certain colors and some others are not. Now the broader question is relevant in here, how much animals can know, how much animals can react. Now particularly the important question is, how should we treat animals? Now when we treat animals, actually animals there are several very important areas where animals and human beings are very much going closer. Now for instance, if a particular animal reacts to a particular color, red color, that means that animal has a certain perception of that color. Okay? Now other animals may not be, even though they perceive it, they not be angry about it or upset or excited about it. Now the important thing is, the amount of animals' knowledge. Now basically why animals should be included in ethics is basically animals are living beings. According to Buddhism, we believe that animals are conscious. And also we believe that according to Buddhism, you become an animal because as a result of your bad karma. But then, after completing your bad karma, you maybe become again a human being. So actually, the Vijnana Sota, the consciousness stream that goes through an animal is maybe something that goes through human being also, right? So in that sense, in Buddhism, at certain level, we really see the continuity of animals and human beings. But simply because some animals, I mean animals are animals, they are limited. But although they are limited, they are conscious, okay? So whether some animals are conscious about the color, that depends on different animals. Elephants may be reacting to certain colors, dogs will be reacting to certain colors. It depends on the capacity of and the perception, the form, kind of perception they have. So there can be differences, but the important thing is how much they perceive, how much they come close to the human beings. Now, there are sometimes we know that there are some types of dogs, who are really very intelligent. Some types of dogs are very intelligent and they can sense the danger and they can do something. And a lot of animals learn things. They know how to open a pipe and drink water. They know how to open a door and go inside. So in that sense you can see different. So the difference is really in degree, not in kind. So there are so many reasons for animals to be included in the ethical discourse because they are conscious living beings. According to Peter Singer, animals also feel. So he takes that as a main thing. But from Buddhist point of view, we have many more reasons why animals need to be included in the ethical discourse. Okay. Okay, I think I will wind up from that because time is passing. So thank you very much for participating. We will meet in the afternoon for the world religion discussion. Okay, thank you.